Good evening. I call the Board of Commissioners for Johnson City to order on October 17th, 2019. I think kind of our first real fall evening, which is really great. So welcome to everyone who's here in the chambers with us, to those who are watching on TV and who are live streaming tonight. I'm very excited to introduce my own pastor, who's going to lead our invocation. If everyone would please rise and remain standing for the pledge. This is Pastor Ethan Magness from First Christian Church.
Let's pray. God, you teach us that we are never truly home until we are with you. And yet your prophets teach even a wandering people to bless the city where they've been placed, to plant gardens and seek the good of the city, to have children and grandchildren until they are called home with you. And so we do, God, ask you to bless this city where you have put us. We, as instructed by you, love Johnson City and seek its good. We plant gardens, we seek its blessing, we raise our children together and our grandchildren, and we give you glory that you've put us in such a place. May you give wisdom to the leaders of our city, even tonight and every night, that they would also bless the city where you have placed them, until we are one day home with you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Chief Staples, would you lead our pledge?
I will. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Stahl, before we get started, I would like to recognize someone who's in our audience tonight so we can all keep our eyes on him. His name is Tyler Crosby. He is a student at East Tennessee State University, majoring in public administration. Wants to be a city manager one day, right? So I've invited him to take our Johnson City 101 course when it comes on board next time, and it'll be a great way to learn all about the city departments, which is just every citizen who goes through that course just really enjoys it a lot. So thank you for attending. And all right, Mr. Stahl.
Mayor, we have a few things to add tonight, and we'll address that in a second, but the first item is consideration of the minutes for the regularly scheduled City Commission meeting held on Thursday, October 3, 2019, for your consideration.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any other comments on the minutes? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
And Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor, I have an item here, a request to add consideration of a temporary occasion license for Scores Grill, 2011 North Roan Street, and this is something that would require action to add to the agenda for consideration. It could be placed right now or somewhere else on your agenda as you consider appropriate.
We'll place it now after I add one other thing to the agenda, okay? I'd like to place on the agenda under others, so it would be item 7B, a discussion with possible action on looking at bridge public affairs for some consulting, economic development consulting work. Do I have a motion to place both items on the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor, this item, the temporary occasion license, be considered. This item is to consider approval of a temporary occasion license for Scores Grill located at 2011 North Roan Street, Johnson City, to serve beer at the Boo and Brew event to be held on October 26, 2019 at the Mall of Johnson City. Front entrance and parking lot. Valid server permits and site plans for the location have been submitted with the application. And we have received reports from various departments, and specifically the legal department, finding no disqualifying factors. And with that in mind, we would recommend approval of this document.
Okay, is the petitioner present? If you would come forward, please, and state your name and address. Thank you for coming. Have you read the rules and regulations about the sale of alcohol in the city of Johnson City? And you agree to abide by those rules?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the petitioner?
His name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your name and address, thank you.
George Leonard, do you want the home address or do you want
Your
the
business will be fine.
business? It's 2011 North Rome Street, inside the Johnson City Mall.
Oh, okay, very
And we
good.
are having the Cleverleys Live that night if anybody would like to come, the Bluegrass Band. So,
Okay, very good. Any other questions about the event?
Move for approval.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes.
Mayor Brock?
Yes, and you can take a minute if you like and tell a little bit more about the event since we're on TV and we have a big audience watching.
we have the Cleverleys Bluegrass Band coming. It's gonna be an outside, concert. And, they were at the Paramount last year with about 1,200 people, so
Oh.
it should be a good show.
Okay, and remind us again what night it is?
It's October 26th.
Okay, very good. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, the next item is appointments. We have consideration of one appointment to the Johnson City Public Library Board to serve as Commissioner John Hunter's designee for your consideration.
Okay, we did find out we can have a designee for this slot, so Commissioner Hunter,
I'd
turn
like
to
to,
you.
is this for a motion, or would it just be?
Make a
I'll
motion.
make a motion for DJ Swatsel to be my designee on the Public Library Board.
And it's a he?
He, yes,
He's agreed to serve in this role?
yes.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second?
All right, any other discussion? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter?
Yes,
Mayor Brock?
Yes. Thank you.
thank you.
Next item is your consent agenda for review and consideration.
Commissioners, is there anything we want to pull on the consent agenda? Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes, I'd like to pull A2.
Okay. Commissioner Hunter?
I'm fine.
Okay. Commissioner Fowler?
None for me.
All right, and I have none. So A2, if you would, Commissioner Calhoun, state your question.
Sure. Obviously, I'm supportive of this contract, but I think it'd be interesting to hear some of the positive things that have already occurred with previous contracts with this particular company. I think that they have been very supportive in some development up to now, and that's why I'm supportive of the contract moving forward. So I know this is a surprise, I apologize, but they gave a good presentation to us during an agenda meeting, a workshop, and I think the general public understanding some of the positive things they've done to date is a good thing.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Mayor, Commission. This is a contract, this is not this would be a new 3-year contract, but not the first time that we've been under contract with Retail Strategies. Most recently, we have been under a 6-month contract with them to review and kind of evaluate our past relationship, make sure that this was something that was beneficial for all parties. And we've had a very active summer with them and strengthened those relationships, and they have shown that they've been very busy. This has been new to me, getting to know Retail Strategies. There was a previous 3-year contract prior to my arrival, and that was up this past February, and so that's where I had this opportunity during this 6-month time to really get to know them. They were very instrumental in the most recent Kmart redevelopment. Now, it's important that I note these folks are not developers, so they were not instrumental in the redevelopment of the site. What they're instrumental in is what's behind the scenes, long before permits are issued and contractors are out on site working on the property. They are involved very early in working with the developer to establish relationships and contacts with potential retailers. So what they will do is they will use data that they have gathered from a variety of sources, shopping characteristics and needs in our community, and they will then balance that against retailers that are actively growing, both national and regional, and they will make those opportunities available to developers like this one. And so in this particular case, these developers, or I should say these retailers that have already moved into this facility, they were actively looking. And so there was a relationship that was set up. What you saw in the paper was the little quib there that I had with Mr. Floyd was it's kind of like blind dating. Retail strategies set up the date, and it's up to the developer and the retailer to decide whether or not they're going to have another date or not. And so that's how they work. These folks are what I consider to be their heaviest asset is data management. They absorb and manage a tremendous amount of data, not only on their client communities, that being us, but also on national and regional retailers. And then their job on the back end or the very early part of the process is to marry up developers with actively growing or actively seeking retailers. And so I have to say that this past summer, in getting to know them, developing that relationship, I was able to even attend 2 different conferences with them and kind of watch them in action. I was impressed, and we have developed a strong relationship. We email or talk on the phone regularly, I would say several times a month, if not several times a week. And our staff does recommend this contract, and if you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
Would you mind just making a couple of comments for the public to hear this? There's a lot of data. You talked about data that they understand about our community.
Sure.
And then a potential retailer looks at a community based on certain criteria.
Sure.
Just, everybody wants a Trader Joe's, right?
Right.
So how does that play into the work that they do and what Trader Joe's is looking for?
Well, Trader Joe's is not only looking for simple demographic data in terms of population numbers, job numbers, things like that, number of households, the demographics in terms of median and average age and income levels. Those are easy numbers that you can obtain through census data or other national sources like that. But what Retail Strategies does is they actually go several steps further, and they will actually mine cell phone data and using other data sources, they're able to glean shopping characteristics and certain demands and expectations of shoppers specific to our area. And so they can use that information and then share that information with retailers like Trader Joe's or others who are seeking certain communities, certain environments, and then hoping that there will be a match. One of the other things that's important is that when you talk about population, like for example, population of Johnson City is roughly 70,000. We know the population, we know where our corporate limits are, but what we think of in terms of your political boundaries or your jurisdictional boundaries or even the population you see in the census, those are very different boundaries when it comes to the retail world. They don't look at the geopolitical boundaries. They don't look at just the population of the corporate limits. They look at half mile, 1 mile, 5 mile, 10-mile radii. They look at drive times. They look at who's driving in for the day and then leaving for the evening, who lives here but then also leaves for the day. They're looking at a number of other factors, not just your geopolitical. So it's a real fascinating industry and something that is highly technical now.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Okay, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions about it? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter? Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor, the next item is ordinances on first reading. We have, first item is ordinance number 4707-19, an ordinance to prescribe the maximum expenditure which a city manager may make without specific authorization of the Board of Commissioners in accordance with Section 45-8 of the Charter of the City of Johnson City, and to repeal all ordinances and parts of ordinances in conflict herewith. This item is before you on first reading and consideration.
What we are looking at tonight is a spinoff. Were you presenting that? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Anybody gets up to the podium, you know. Our Director of Purchasing, Debbie Dillon, has worked very diligently with Bob Wilson on a new purchasing policy. Very good, and we passed that at our last meeting. This was a direct result of some of the things that we were taking a look at to see if we were relevant and what other cities, we benchmarked other cities to see if our city manager had the signing authority that was commensurate with the size of our city, the activities, the financial activities of our city. And so this recommendation is to move his signing authority from $25,000 to $50,000. And so, Commissioners, are there any other, we've had a good discussion about this in our workshop. Is there any other question that you might have or comment that you have?
Just to clarify that those checks signed at 50,000 below still will be reported to us.
That's
for
correct. They
review.
wind up in our packet. They sure do. Okay. And then with that kind of authority, he can then make decisions about other signing authorities within the organization, and would encourage them to do so. Okay.
And this takes 3 readings, correct?
This does.
Yes.
Okay, so this is first reading.
Is there a motion?
Move for approval.
Okay, any other discussion? Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun.
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler.
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter.
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes.
That brings us to ordinance number 4708-19, an ordinance to revise, update, and add new sections to the code of the City of Johnson City regarding animal control by amending Title 10 of the Code of Ordinances.
Mr. Wilson?
I realize you just passed the last ordinance, but just a clarification, items 25,000 and above will still be bid. But the manager will have authority to sign off on any bid item. It'll be a formal bid process up to $50,000.
And Mr. Wilson, before you get started, I'd just like to make a couple of comments for the benefit of the public and to my fellow commissioners as well. I am on the Animal Control Board, as are you, along with 5 other citizens and representatives from the county of Washington County, and then the Humane Society and a member at large. This is a hardworking board. Our animal shelter is probably one of the flagship shelters, I would say, in the state of Tennessee, and we're very proud of that. However, we're going to hear some numbers tonight that show the number of animals that really pass through the shelter is well over 5,000, plus what goes through the Humane Society. So we have an issue, and this message is to the public, that we have, probably well over 6,000 animals that are in the custody of the shelter and the Humane Society because of unwanted litters, because of pet owners who can no longer care for their animals. And we're going to see a budget of close to $1 million plus what the Humane Society does to care for these animals. So the Animal Control Board feels that we just can't sustain a model like this going into the future. To keep building more space and requiring more money from both the governments and from very generous donors who give to the care of these animals. So the Animal Control Board is proposing an ordinance to help be more preventive on, to reduce the number of unwanted litters that we have in our community, as well as addressing an issue that is in the range of animal cruelty. So that being said, Mr. Wilson's going to give us more details about it, and we'll move it through on this is be first reading. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. For the last full year, which was actually FY18, I guess it's a calendar year of numbers, just to give you an idea, we took in just under 1,900 dogs, over 2,700 cats into the shelter. And that's consistent. Actually, it's down a little bit from prior years, but it's a very large number of animals that are passing through the shelter. We're fortunately able to have over 1,200 adoptions for dogs, almost 1,900 for cats. But when you do the math there still is leaving a lot of animals in the shelter. And the shelter is typically at capacity. I think at our last meeting, we weren't able to take any more cats because we were at capacity of cats. And that also means that there's members in the community that are also housing cats in addition to the cats at the animal shelter. So there's a lot of dogs and cats out there that are beyond the shelter that certain individuals are housing. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the number of animals that we have there. What we're trying to do with this ordinance is to improve the lives of our animals and the safety of our animals. And there's three main areas that we're looking at: registration, restraints, and spay-neuter. To get control of the animals and to reduce this number of animals that are passing through the shelter each year, it's imperative that our spay-neuter be increased and be improved. So under the registration, animals are currently required to be registered. It's not heavily enforced, but there is a requirement there, so that's not new. It's really good for 3 years. We're proposing to change it to an annual registration and to also charge a fee. It'd be a nominal fee, but the intent is just to get control of the population. So that's the registration side of this. Under restraints, we're looking at if a dog is traveling in a pickup truck or on a trailer, that they be restrained by a 3-point harness system. It's really for the protection of the dog. If they're not restrained somehow, it could easily be thrown out, or they get excited, they could easily fall out of the truck. So it's really for the dog's safety. We also have a new section that restrains the amount of time that a dog can be out on a trolley in the yard, and trying to keep that to 12 hours of consecutive, a maximum of 12 consecutive hours per day. That's just so the dog is not spending all the time outside unattended to.
I think, Mr. Wilson, if I could just
Certainly.
interject right there, it is to prohibit from being attached to a fixed, you can't do it to a tree, they have to be on a trolley.
It's a trolley, yes.
Right.
Thank you, Mayor. That was my next point. but-
Okay, sorry.
And you did an excellent job of making that point. So the other is that they cannot be chained to a fixed object as part of that 12 hours. In 21, we're also saying that they can't be tethered or chained or left unattended. So if you do have it out, you have to be attended. You can't just put the dog or the cat or that out there and not leave them attended. Another item that we're looking at, and it's a little beyond that, is, okay, we have the fee, we talked about that. When we bring an animal into the shelter, unless it qualifies for an unaltered permit, and that would be an animal that is being bred if you were a breeder or dealer, and if you are, that's fine. That's okay to do that. But we would like you to get a permit. You're required to get a permit for that too. But if an animal comes in and it does not qualify for an unaltered permit, then following the 72-hour waiting period, then that animal would be spay-neutered. And now during that period, the staff will make extensive efforts to contact the owner. If the animal has a rabies tag on or has a collar identification, if they've been microchipped, then we could do that. But the staff will make all efforts to try to locate the owner. The intent is not to just take the dog. It's really, we want to get the dog back with the owner. And also, if we bring them, if they're brought in, if they don't have a rabies vaccinated, they will be vaccinated against rabies. In section 105, we address the ordinance addresses appropriate shelter, and the intent is that the animal will be housed in a fenced-in area or pen. That's what is preferred with this. But as to the doghouse itself, we're looking for a dry house, and it needs to also have protection from the sun and from the elements. We've defined in the ordinance. We've also defined protection in certain extreme weather conditions, below 32 or above 85 degrees.
There are numerous organizations that help owners with this if they currently
There are.
chain the dog and we want them off the chain. These organizations will come in and actually build the fenced-in area and provide a doghouse.
There are,
Yeah.
and staff will be glad to work with those folks to try to help them out. You know, if you can't afford to do it, there's options out there. So the other is we'd like to have it preferably be have three sides to the shelter to protect from the weather. And also fencing is the preferred way to have the dog in an enclosed area. We added a new class of penalties where any violation to the ordinance will be charged as a Class A misdemeanor, fine not to exceed $50 a day, which is the state constitution limits that, but each day will count as a separate offense. And when I talked about spay neuter, if we bring an animal in unattended, animal is brought in, or an at-large or stray, that goes back to the 72 hours. That's also in another section under penalties, where if they do retrieve their animal, then there will be fees they'll have to pay, boarding fees, any veterinarian fees, medical expenses, things of that nature. Under spay neuter requirements, we revised the definition of and went from commercial breeders to dealers, and there's been some other items that were redefined there. We define an unaltered certificate, and that is for special exceptions that qualify what those qualifications are. So that's kind of the highlight version of this. There were definitions that were added to provide more clarification. There was some wordsmithing in there, just trying to make it read better, make it more clear. Didn't change the intent of those sections, but I think it makes it read better. But these three items, the restraint, the registration, and the spay neuter, that's the big intentions of the ordinance. I have a group of folks here who, if I've left anything out or there's something that needs to be more reinforced, who can speak to this. A number have spent considerable amount of time and effort in reviewing this ordinance, reviewing ordinances from other cities. It's a pretty exhaustive search that they did in looking at other ordinances to try to get our ordinance in line with I'm going to call best practices, and they have done an extensive amount of time and dedication for that. So if anybody has something, if I may, please do. Thank you.
Christie, go ahead at the microphone and state your name if you would. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Just to pass out to.
Sure. I'll pass them out.
My name is Christy Rabbitoy, 116 Allison Timbers Road, Piney Flats, Tennessee. Mayor Brock knows how happy I am to be here because actually I co-chaired this task force to look at the animal ordinance. And it's been almost 2 years that we've been working on this. My particular interest, as you can see from the flyer in my card, is I have an organization called Chain Free Dogs. And just for your information, in the last 5 years, we have taken 160 dogs off chains in Johnson City and Washington County, and a few in Piney Flats. Just for a point of reference, Chain Free Bristol has taken a similar number of dogs off chains over the last 8 years. And a year and a half ago, Chain Free Greenville started, and they have taken 35 dogs off chains. So in the local area, we have taken 400 dogs off chains by providing safe chain link fencing, approximately 100 feet of fence, 4 feet high with a standard gate. And I assure you, the people that get these fences are extremely appreciative. Now, we work with the animal shelter, we work with the Humane Society. As Mr. Wilson said, the first thing we do, and you can see, we require the dogs to be spay or neuter. So that's one of the ways. Over half of the dogs that we have built a fence for were not spay or neutered prior to our building the fence. So we're very strict about that. They must do that. We get them a voucher from the Humane Society, and then the process takes on, they get the fence. There's another organization you should be aware of, and it's called Roofs for Rover. They will provide free dog houses. So I work with them, and they will build get an appropriate sized dog house for the animal. So together with this work and with the flyers, and we're at the various affairs around town, we've been in the JC Press a few times. When I started on this, the first thing I said, that in understanding, we reviewed the ordinances from Knoxville, Chattanooga, Memphis. They are very up to date with, and the national movement that you do not chain dogs 24/7 and just leave them in your backyard. But I also know that change takes time. So I am the one that suggested that we kind of move into this over a period of time, setting that the use of a trolley at first and getting them off fixed objects, because that's the worst thing for a dog. With a trolley, as described in the ordinance, they have some room to play, it's safe, back and forth, and even that, we don't want them on over 12 hours. We also clarified you cannot have a dog under 6 months on a chain or a trolley, and that's really for the health of the dog. But our goal is eventually to make Johnson City and Washington County chain-free. So therefore, in 2021, we're hoping that with the acceptance of the ordinance, that we will be able to have chain-free Johnson City and be able to very proudly say that, as other cities in Tennessee do. So after 2021, no dog would be allowed to be chained unless they are under direct observation or in attendance of their owner. We clearly realize that people take their dogs out in their yards, do their gardening, their lawnmower, put their dog on a tether, and that's safe, and we have no problem with that. But what we have a problem with is 24/7 chaining in all weather, not bringing them in. The other goal of our organization, when we go out there, we don't just build fences, we educate, we explain about extreme weathers, we explain about how it can make a dog aggressive if you keep them on a chain and they're more likely to attack. So it's all part of education and getting the public to get on board with the chain-free society. So a lot of that ordinance, the part with restraints, has been my push to make Johnson City and Washington County chain-free for dogs. I'll take any questions that you might have.
Christy, thank you for what you do and your organization does. We know the good work, and we know the good work will continue now that that we move this through with this ordinance. Ms. Davis, you want to come up? Tammy Davis is the director of the Washington County Johnson City Animal Shelter. On any given day, times 4, because they all have 4 paws. There are a million things going on at the animal shelter. as I said earlier, we have one that we can be very, very proud of, but we really need to reduce the number of unwanted litters and animals. If you could just kind of go through, I mean, what we're talking about in this ordinance, we're not going to be going out knocking on doors at people's homes. Would you kind of tell how the spay-neuter thing really would work in terms of when the animal shelter comes in contact with the animal?
Correct. We are not, we have no reason, we do not want to go out. We're not going to be going door to door to try to enforce rules that don't need to be enforced. Our goal ultimately is to limit the number of animals coming into the shelter, to educate the community, to educate the public, and to have the animals remain in the home with their owners. We just want the animals to be healthy. We want to get Johnson City and Washington County up to par with the surrounding areas and other communities that have already done this. It's very doable, as Christy said. There's lots of cities across the United States. This is the movement going forward, is to do this. As far as the spay-neuter, we just want the ability, if we know that an animal ends up in the animal shelter, and you can pretty much tell if an animal has had a very good life or a very rough life. If a dog or cat comes into the shelter, and we like to call them repeat offenders, we take people's name and addresses, and certain people will bring numerous litters of puppies and kittens into the shelter every year. So we'd just like to be able to have that opportunity to say, this needs to stop. You need to stop letting this dog or cat have babies and continually dumping them here at the animal shelter. So with the new ordinance.
What do we do if people can't afford the spay-neuter?
We have generous donors who will help, and we work very closely with the Humane Society. So in every ordinance that we are wanting to move forward with, we are going to give the public options, just like the chain-free fencing or low-cost spay-neuter vouchers, anything that we can do, like we said, to educate, and we will give options so that we make this as doable for the community as possible. Like I said, ultimately, we want happy, healthy pets to stay with their owners. That's the goal, and not end up in the shelter. So.
Any questions for Ms. Davis? Any comments? Rick, thank you. And before we have a motion and a second, I really want to thank the people who have come tonight and others who are not here, who've worked so hard. Linda Bearfield, who is sitting here, thank you so much for the hours and hours you've spent writing this ordinance. Fred Warren, who's on our board, who is such a champion for animals in our community, and all the work that you've done, and everybody else who's here. Indy Powell, who's also on the board. These are people who give like you wouldn't believe to care for the animals in our community. So, Commissioners, if you have no other questions, is there a motion?
So moved to approve.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? And this is first reading. There will be second reading, of which Mr. Stahl will have public input at second reading. And I believe, Mr. Wilson, before we take the vote, there is going to be a public informational meeting. You want to talk about that?
On Tuesday night, October 29th, 6 o'clock at MPCC and Memorial Park Community Center. We'll have an information meeting to talk about this. You can come and ask questions so we can get into it a little more in depth if there is, if there's an interest. We'll be advertising this in the paper. So Tuesday, October 29th, 6 o'clock at Memorial Park.
So any citizen can come and get their questions answered at that session. And then at second reading, we'll have public input here as well. Okay. Ms. Jennings?
Commissioner Calhoun.
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler.
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter.
Yes.
Mayor
Yes.
Brock.
Yes. Thank you. And thank y'all.
Mayor, that brings you to ordinances under third reading. We have ordinance number 4705-19, an ordinance for text amendment changes to the sign regulations in the zoning code for your review and consideration.
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
That was tough to follow, so I'll be brief and not nearly as
But we'll
interesting.
give you a cat.
probably.
I mean, if you want. Shall I bring some?
We'd like a cat. My wife's allergic, but we do have a dog. And
Tammy, do you have a cat that's for allergic people?
do you have one of those bald ones, like me, the Cornish Rex cats? I like those. Those have a particular shock value.
So this is on TV. We know he's got to take it now.
I'll give you my business card. This is a staff-initiated request to amend the sign ordinance of the Johnson City zoning ordinance. There are 3 changes and 3 purposes for those changes. The first would be to correct text discrepancies by eliminating all the references to the B3 sign regulations that are found in the section of the zoning ordinance that pertains to sign requirements in the B4, B5, I1, I2, BP, and PB districts. Also to provide uniformity with other sections of the code by reducing the minimum setback for freestanding signs except in the B2 from 10 feet to 7.5 feet, which would match the 7.5 feet drainage and utility easement. And then the last change would be to enable businesses in the B4, B5, I1, I2, BP, and PB districts to have greater visibility without negatively affecting the aesthetic nature of our major commercial corridors by allowing those businesses which elect to have a ground-mounted sign instead of a freestanding sign to also have a projecting sign. That's business-friendly. It gives them greater visibility. That and also reducing the setback provides businesses with greater visibility. There is no new information from the first and second reading, and Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of these 3 changes at its August 6, 2019 meeting.
I see Mr. Hunter here. Is this ordinance outside of the historic zone, and there are other sign ordinances for historic zoning?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, they'll still, signs in the historic district will still have to get a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Zoning Commission.
Commissioners?
I move for approval.
On third reading, Ms. Jennings.
Commissioner Calhoun,
Yes.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Mayor Brock.
Yes. Thank you.
I will say thank you to the staff for working through this. I've heard a lot of positive comments in the community, business community of this being done.
It's
Thank
good to
you.
hear. Thank you.
Mayor, under other, we have 2 items. The first is a short-term rental presentation from Development Services. Is that you, Will, or is that Matt? Mr. Manley, here he is. Here he comes.
Nice comments about the cat.
Do you need one?
He needs one too, yes. He
I think so.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hey.
Good to see you all. Tonight's presentation, this is an information item regarding short-term rentals. These are the items we're going to cover today. We're going to give a little brief background information, take a look at the state law, what the state law says about short-term rentals. We're going to look at how that impacts Johnson City. We also have some information about the hotel industry and if it's had an impact on that. Some information on the current status of the short-term rentals in Johnson City, and then look at some of the key factors that may affect us here locally, and then look at a wide range of potential restrictions that could be considered, look at some other cities, and then talk about some community engagement strategies. So in short, short-term rentals are residential properties that are used for overnight lodging. They're part of the shared economy, and so you can see the logos here. So there's a variety of online platforms that hosts use to offer their properties as short-term rentals. Many of these have been consolidated, and so your main ones are going to be Airbnb, VRBO, and maybe a couple others. And we've looked into that some to see which of those are present in Johnson City. So looking at the state law, there's a couple of key things that the state law talks about. One of the main ones is which ones are grandfathered. So if you have a short-term rental that was in place and you have paid your state sales tax for the six of the last 12 months prior to any ordinance going into effect, then any new regulations would not apply to you. You would be grandfathered in. So key things being that you paid your state sales tax. That grandfather status does not transfer if you sell the property or transfer the property, or if you discontinue the use of the short-term rental for 30 consecutive months. Another aspect of the state law is that it gives the authority to cities to establish permitting and application processes. And it also allows homeowners associations to restrict or outlaw short-term rentals in those areas. So what is the status of things here in Johnson City? Essentially, I've come up with that there are about 34 short-term rentals currently in Johnson City. That's by looking at 3 different select dates. I looked at a very low travel period, the end of January, not much going on. As many hosts as possible would most likely be unbooked, so they would show up on the website. So, and I looked at, just one guest and looking for one night and just middle of the week. So looking for as many that would be available as possible rather than maybe looking on a busy weekend where a lot of them would be booked. That may skew the numbers. I looked ahead at the spring race when maybe some hosts would just say, I'm just going to do this a couple times a year, benefit when there's a lot of people coming in town, but maybe not do it all the time throughout the year like an investor might. So I looked at right before the spring race and then right before the fall race in the middle of the week, again, just for one night, and was able to look at how many units were available then. Those numbers did not surpass the January numbers. And then the other sites that we looked at really didn't have much. A lot of them take listings from Airbnb and VRBO and put them on their website. So it basically boiled down to about 35 units. So that's a snapshot of what we're looking at as far as the impact of these in Johnson City.
Did you just look inside the corporate boundaries, or?
Yeah, it took a little bit of, because they don't tell you exactly where it is. So there were some that were close, and so I had to kind of dig in and then cross-reference that with our parcel map and kind of figure out which one, where it might be located, and then look and see if it was inside the city limits or not. So eliminated ones that were outside the city limits, eliminated hotels that actually use those platforms for booking, and we're just looking at residential properties here. And then I also looked at some, you see the entire house that's listed here as well. So wanted to see, versus something that maybe someone's renting a room or their basement, something like that. Wanted to look at which ones, if someone's renting an entire house, that could potentially have a larger impact on a neighborhood or on your neighbors. And so I really wanted to get a snapshot of what are we looking at from that standpoint as well. So this is the analysis of short-term rentals, and these are just snapshots of from the websites where you can kind of see the locations, and kind of see some concentration in the different areas there. So what is the impact? This is not a direct study related to short-term rentals, but Marcus and Millchap, commercial real estate brokers, put out studies. This is from the Mid-South region hotel forecast. And so they're looking at some of the numbers and growth and demand and revenues, building, how many hotels are being built. And so we're seeing a lot of growth, continued growth as far as hotels are continuing to be built. Occupancy is rather flat, but they're still building them. So there's increasing supply and demand is about the same. So, so that's going to affect occupancy, but revenues are on the increase. So there's nothing really suggesting that that hotels are getting significantly impacted by short-term rentals in our region. So what are the key issues we want to focus in on for Johnson City? We want to talk about the lodging tax, making sure folks that are having transient population reside here in town for business or travel, that they're paying their fair share. Building codes and even public safety. Is there anything we can address from that standpoint? Economic development. Do these units provide a positive impact from an economic development standpoint? Providing unique experiences for people who are visiting to Johnson City. And neighborhood compatibility, how do these impact our existing neighborhoods from a land use perspective? So with taxes, what we currently have under Title V, Chapter 3 of the city code, we have hotel defined. And the way that hotel is defined would suggest that it includes short-term rental, just based on the definition. And so that would be a 7% tax on the amount that's charged to the occupants that we could say they probably should be paying based on our definition. Working with our finance and legal departments, we've made a proposed revision to add an additional clarity for this, the hotel tax ordinance, to include a definition for short-term rental as proposed here. And anywhere where it references a hotel or a hotel operator, in that ordinance, we would add "and short-term rental." And so there would be no confusion about the need to remit that tax. And so if that were to be added to our ordinance, then staff would reach out to the online platforms and request that they work with those providers to take out that tax automatically through the online service. And we understand that other cities have done that and been successful in doing that. They're already doing, I need to back up a minute. They're already doing that with the state sales tax. So those 34 short-term rentals that we looked at earlier, at least the ones that are on Airbnb, which was 24, it is our understanding, anecdotally, by talking to a few hosts, that they are paying state sales tax. They get a form at the end of the year showing how much they've paid. And so they should have documentation and so all of those would be grandfathered in.
But we're not collecting any local option sales tax on
No.
those.
So the state sales tax being paid, that checks the box as far as grandfathering. But the local tax is not required for the grandfathering. But moving forward with adding the additional clarity, we should be able to get that tax paid.
So if a person checks into Hampton Inn, they're paying state sales tax, they're paying local option sales tax, and they're paying a lodging tax that goes on that.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're looking at would be that there's parity with the short-term rentals. So there's, not any advantage to them over, other bricks and mortar.
Precisely.
Residential
And really just making it fair. I was in a discussion with some other colleagues recently about, and the question came up, are some cities charging a higher tax for short-term rentals? And in my opinion, it would have to be the same. But that would be one way that maybe a city would try to discourage them and push people just by economics, push them back towards hotel use. But we're just talking about making it a fair, level playing field here.
Would a business license be required or to maintain a?
So that's all kind of part of the next, next group of things. So that's taxes. Building codes, very briefly, typically this would be considered this is a business, and so and it's a lodging business, so there are specific building code requirements for those. The state has said these are still residential uses, and so we would not be going in and saying, oh, you got to put in sprinklers or have additional exits. That kind of thing would not be required based on what the state is telling us. So, but we could require basic things like fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, that type of thing. Land use regulations are wide-ranging, and so we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So the way I've broken this out is through the lens of enforcement, because that's going to be a key issue to this. If we create new regulations and restrictions that we want people to follow, how are we as a city going to enforce them? And so the easiest way to enforce is just to permit them across the board and just allow them and not have any additional restrictions. Slightly, more difficult to enforce would be just an outright ban. And so if we saw one pop up on an online platform, we just would go shut it down. Or you could make it a permitted use by right in all or certain districts, but have an application, a permit business license that's required. So they at least come in, they register, maybe meet some basic requirements, pay their tax. Could possibly be able to, through that, have proof that they're an owner occupant if we wanted to make that a requirement. And this is best if there's not a significant impact to your housing stock. So that's one way that short-term rentals really impact cities, where we're seeing heavy regulation from cities where there's a lot of tourists and folks are changing from long-term rentals to short-term rentals as a way to increase revenue. And so those long-term rentals are leaving the market, and that just reduces the overall housing stock, and it can specifically make it difficult for people who are looking for affordable places to live. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of restriction. I don't think we have that issue currently in Johnson City. I think one of the things that's most attractive about Johnson City is that it is affordable. That may not always be the case, and I think that's something that we may want to keep in mind as we move forward, whatever direction we go with this, is that can be a key issue that could affect future, the way we look at this in the future. The other issue is just the ability to enforce. And so if you're not hearing a lot of complaints, a lot of issues from the community, then just putting some basic requirements in place rather than creating what is on the right here is a little more detailed restrictions, such as limiting the number of days per year that you could offer up a short-term rental, limiting the number of guests that can stay per bedroom is a very common one, dictating that it can only be in an accessory dwelling unit or in a principal dwelling unit, adding additional parking restrictions, requiring that they notify neighbors, making sure that there's a contact person, either the owner or a responsible party, that can respond within an hour if there's an issue, requiring inspections, limiting so that people who are renting the property could not then do short-term rental. Those are some examples of the types of restrictions that are difficult to prove, they're hard to enforce, would require additional resources and manpower to be able to address those. That said, there are a lot of cities that are moving forward with this type of restriction. So those are the types of things we're looking at. So what are our neighbors doing? What are other folks in the region doing? Kingsport has not adopted an ordinance. Bristol has not adopted an ordinance. So right here in the Tri-Cities, we're the only ones that are looking at this currently. Further down the road, Morristown adopted an ordinance last year. They do require a permit, additional parking spaces. They limit the number of guests, no signage. They do require smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers. Must have a local contact. Only owner-occupied are allowed in their residential zones, and then you can have, in your commercial zones, you could have non-owner occupied. So you could just, as an investor, you could have a short-term rental. But they're not enforcing this. They have it on the books. They are not actively patrolling. They're not actively looking online, or even if they see something, they're not responding. But it is there on a complaint basis. So if they get a complaint, they can respond. Knoxville, going further down the road, has also created an ordinance. It predates the state law. Interestingly, they created different types of permits. They broke it down. Type 1 is an owner-occupied in a residential district, and as an owner, if you and you're occupying that, you can only occupy one property at a time. But to meet a standard of more than 6 months a year, you're only allowed one of those permits. So that has a great reduction in how far spread these would be in a residential neighborhood. In a non-residential district or a commercial district, they max 2 permits is the most that you can have. So again, that restricts, say, outside investors, buying up a block of townhomes or commercial buildings and just really changing the nature of an area by just converting things into short-term rentals and essentially creating a hotel. And then their type 3 are essentially any short-term rentals that were in place before their ordinance, and then they expire after 1 year. So that's really not even applicable because that predates state law as well. So.
Have you had any contact with Kingsport and Bristol? I know the CVBs in all three cities have been having some discussions about this and looking, through that group.
I have contacted them, but all they shared with me is that they don't have an ordinance, but I had not gotten into what
I'm just
the
wondering,
nuances of their discussions are.
Regionally, if it makes sense that we all kind of do the same thing. Otherwise, we may just be pushing, potential business to another city that doesn't have,
That's
these kind of
certainly something
ordinance.
to consider.
Yeah.
That may be something you could bring up with your colleagues and on the other commissions and say, are we, we want to look at this together.
I don't think we stop. I think we keep moving forward, and maybe we can, show some leadership
I would imagine they
here.
would look at us and
Yeah.
say, how did y'all do it, or what y'all come up with? And there are because there's only so many things you can regulate. There tends to be a lot of similarity from city to city, but there are some little differences. The last one is Red Bank. They actually do have some unique things to theirs. Such as they have a restriction that you cannot rent for less than 24 hours. They made sure they called that out. They also have a sign that has to be posted for 30 days on the property when they apply. So before they get approved or denied, they have to post this signage. If they get any objections, then they will have a hearing, and they'll take in information from neighbors and things like that. So that was a little bit interesting. But otherwise, it's very similar to what we're seeing, which is permitted with conditions. And then these list of conditions, which again, can be very difficult to enforce, but they're there if you need them. That's kind of the way I see these things are going. So I've contacted MTAS and asked them. I worked on a short-term rental matrix when I was in Colorado, and I've asked them to create the same type of thing where we've surveyed all the cities in the state that have a short-term rental ordinance and divide up the various issues or topics that may be covered by that ordinance, and then list out all the cities and see where they land on those different issues. And so this is an example from Colorado, but we've requested a similar type product so that we can really, in a snapshot, look at all the other municipalities and counties throughout the state and see where everyone's landed. So I'm hoping to get that back soon, so that could be a really helpful guide. Another guide that we'd like to see is staff has created a survey. Right now there's 29 questions. It's a draft. I think it's a little bit long. Maybe we can whittle that down. But we'd love to be able to do a survey, put it out on SurveyMonkey on the website, maybe Facebook, or maybe a shortened version for Facebook. Something where we can just get some feedback from residents and say, where do you land on this? Do you think this is good? Are you fearful of these? Or, if you had specific concerns, have you had great experiences? Where do people land on this? I really don't have too much of a sense, and I'd love to hear kind of a larger voice on that. And so I think a survey would be an excellent tool. Surveys for short-term rentals have been used across the country as a tool for this. We've also discussed hosting community forums where you can get into a little more nuanced conversation about what issues people may have or why they think it's so great. And so we've talked about hosting one down here on the south side at Memorial Park, and then maybe at Winged Deer, give opportunity for folks from different areas of the city to come and weigh in. And then we would utilize that citizen input to really drive, where do we want to focus? Which of these kind of examples of restrictions seem to make sense to address issues, or are we just not hearing issues? Which direction we want to go? And so tonight, staff is asking, what is your sense of how you want to give us direction on what to pursue with this? And also, if you think the strategy for community engagement sounds good, then we would pursue that as well. So welcome your feedback.
Commissioner Hunter was asking about business license. So the business tax code of the state of Tennessee actually includes an exemption for owner-operators of residential and non-residential buildings, other than hotels, motels, or rooming houses. So even if they were taxable, they only would have to get a minimum tax license for $15 between $3,000 and $10,000 in annual sales. Anything $10,000 above would require a standard business license, but it appears that these would be, the residential would be exempt
From that specific license.
from this
But
specific license.
if we created our own license for short-term rentals or permit, application, registry, then it would come with fees
Right.
to just cover the staff time spent on that.
And how would we implement the local option? Or is that a possibility, or is it just the fees from permits?
The hotel tax,
Local sales tax,
Yeah.
the 2.5%.
through the websites, that would be really the only way we'd be able to do it, that
We would have to get Airbnb to collect that, or whoever that
Yeah.
room was.
Pat, I mean, if I was renting for the races years ago, 2 years ago, on a Facebook page, how do you capture this?
That's a good point. I mean, the kind of the wild card, Craigslist was listed on there. I only saw one. Totally different. It's like a, classified. It's not in that same type of system where you put in the dates you want to go and you're just offering it up. Those would be very, very difficult to track.
You base this on volume. I mean, if you just, once and twice a year when the races are here, you rent out a room versus you're doing it on an ongoing basis and, you're collecting over $5,000 a year or 1,000 or whatever it is.
And these hosts, they're being driven to these platforms because they've got to reach outside our market. That's where people go. If they want to find a room, they go to Airbnb or VRBO. That's the marketplace. And so outside of that, I don't think we would have a lot that were, not only if it was just a couple times a year, but also just the volume that would be utilizing platforms that don't have as broad a reach. So.
Matt, you mentioned about neighborhoods who had HOAs could, within that, they could say, we don't want short-term rentals. Can a neighborhood who doesn't have an HOA, but it's a community neighborhood, can they get together and decide they don't want that, or do they have to be bylaws, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, my reading is it looks like bylaws. The state law has some pretty specific language. Authorizes condominium, co-ops, homeowners associations, or other similar entity to prohibit. So similar entity is some broad language, I think, so.
Come up with something.
That would be excellent, from MTAS to see,
Neighborhood.
if they've heard of any other neighborhoods doing that. Nashville would probably be a great place to look and see if they've had any neighborhoods that are, that don't have traditional, HOAs, maybe some older neighborhoods that are really trying to fight this, if they've done that.
Do we have any information that shows, for cities that implemented this, was there a reduction in visitors to the city? Was there a reduction in the housing rentals because of adding this, or did it make any difference?
Housing rentals being.
On Airbnb or?
Oh, did it reduce those?
Yeah, like there's 34 right now. for cities that have implemented this, have they done any studies to say, well, it was 34 and now it's 12, or now it?
No, that may be another interesting thing. I am certain that heavily restricted areas such as Asheville, Nashville, they are certainly deterring people from offering up their homes. They've created a cost, extra bureaucracy loophole, hoops to jump through. So I'm certain that it's reduced, just anecdotally. But I don't have a study with specific data to that. But yeah, we can certainly ask around and see if there's any kind of measurable impact. It's kind of hard to say if someone's any new short-term rentals that may have been created that never did because of the law, but you could see if they actually people opted that were doing it to stop operating.
Cost-wise, they would just pass it on to the, to the end user, to the renter, So, Commissioners, what guidance do we want to pass on? Thank you, very thorough presentation.
I think the MTS study is going to be good to know what they're doing and how they're doing it, and we should keep pushing on to see what we can do, because I think we're missing out on some revenue tax-wise coming back to the city. So-
One suggestion, which you just reminded me of, is that we could move forward with the ordinance change to the hotel tax. Add the definition of short-term rental. If you want to separate that issue, that's kind of a clean and easy, and that takes care of the hotel tax portion of it. And the land use restrictions and the applications and permits and where we want, maybe, we're okay with these in our, downtown urban areas, but further out in our suburbs, we think it's inappropriate. Getting into that level of detail and needing that community input to guide that we're seeing that as a much longer process to be able to accurately and effectively come up with an ordinance that's going to be meaningful. And but I think the taxation issue seems pretty straightforward, and so you could direct us to make that change in that ordinance, and then take our time with community input and whatnot to look at the land use ordinance.
If short-term rental really fits the definition of hotel, did I understand that correctly? Would it not be covered under the hotel lodging?
It was my opinion that way it's described, which certainly seems like it would apply, but it was legal's opinion that we add additional language so that we add that clarity.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is that we, under the current lodging tax, we add the short-term rental to that, so it covers that.
Sounds good.
The other parts of this, in terms of restrictions or other things that we would add to it, we would then have a separate ordinance that covers short-term rentals.
Yeah, it would either be changes to our zoning code. It would be at a different section of the city code, so we wouldn't be going back to the same ordinance and changing it again. We would take care of the hotel tax ordinance, and then we would be bringing in a whole separate ordinance.
So where would the local option sales tax fall, Janet?
We would have to get
We'll have to work with Airbnb
Airbnb to get them to
Okay,
collect
major-
it.
but which
From an
which
ordinance standpoint.
From an ordinance standpoint.
The taxation,
Okay, well,
The same chapter.
yeah.
How soon do you think you could get that to
The
us?
second one?
The hotel motel ordinance, hotel motel tax ordinance.
Okay.
Just add it to that.
So we would do the lodging tax and the local option sales tax in the current lodging ordinance that we have.
That sounds correct.
Just-
And next meeting.
We could get a draft of that?
We could get first reading, then have a public hearing, and then it would need
So
3
that'd be,
readings.
our November 4th? Can we get that? 7th? Yeah, that's right,
Fourth is Monday. Let's have it prepared and ready. Of course,
Sure.
in the meantime, y'all talk with Mr. Peterson, since he's not here tonight, and tell him what we've discussed, talked about, and come back on that side with that, and
Okay.
then continue research on the short-term rental ordinance with MTS information that we,
Well, how about the survey? Do you think we need to start that and get some feedback from the community on this?
well, I always think it's always good to get feedback from our community.
You need to wait, though.
It's
until-
like, how many people even know about this now? I don't know. Let's
I think
go ahead
before
and
you
take
get the
this
public
first step.
input,
yeah.
you need to get the MTAS study or matrix and maybe have some backing from that first.
Okay. So report back to y'all after we get more information from other municipalities, kind of give a better idea of what everyone's ordinances look like, and decide how to move forward again at that point.
If you can find a community that's done the Survey Monkey, or at least a survey, and you can get the results of that, I think it'd be really helpful to find out. you know, what the
I
communities-
have found results from other cities.
Maybe put that in the packet, and we can take a look
Okay,
at it.
and just kind of see where they weighed in on it.
I think it'd be good to incorporate homeowners associations in town too, because some of them are very active and have some strong thoughts on a lot of things, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'd be curious, the actual effectiveness and the implementation of the permit fees, the $100, or, because like you said, some of those are not manageable to monitor, but can you all implement a process of once a month, you've got somebody that's going online to see if there's any new ones that need to have their door knocked on and say, let's do this right?
Yeah, so kind of an enforcement strategy and a process for issuing permits. Yeah, absolutely.
Any idea on the amount of revenue this would bring in if things were just exactly the way they are right now?
In a very, I don't know if conservative is the right word, but using the highest numbers possible, the highest likelihood would be about somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 a year in hotel tax, with the way, like a snapshot of today. Yeah.
If the commission did nothing, the state law authorizes short-term rentals, correct?
Yes.
So that means that if nothing happened, people could still do it on their own and do whatever they've been doing, without any regulation of any sort. Is that right?
Except for, we still have our noise ordinances, we have our zoning code. We have, everything that everyone must abide by within the city. Those are really the only restrictions or regulations that are affecting these, nothing specific to short-term rental.
Well, I think we all kind of feel that short-term rentals are on the uptick. It's a real trendy thing. So getting our, ordinance in place before they really take off, I think is a smart thing to do, so.
Just kind of looking forward.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So-
I think I did a couple years ago. This issue was going through the State House, and I did a similar analysis to see how many were out there. I think there was about 19 at that time. So in a year and a half, 2 years, we've seen a slight, marginal increase for sure.
I'd rather get ours in place before somebody tells us how to do it.
Did you happen to look in Bristol and Kingsport to see, just roughly, do they have the same number or less or more?
No, I have not done a comparison, but that may be interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And then-
Carter County's actually starting to look at this, Elizabeth, and because just out in the outlying,
Properties.
area, around the lakes and all, you're seeing more of it, so.
Some really neat ones out there, by the way. that-
You can pull up.
Yeah,
I know
check 'em out.
somebody's got one.
Yeah.
Anything else, Matt?
That's it.
Great job, thank you so much.
I think I'm good here, so I appreciate your
I
time.
think we're well on our way then. You got your instructions?
It-
Yes, sir.
It's your comments about regionalism, if we're able to push through with the hotel motel component, it may be worthwhile for you to send a letter to the other cities to say, here's where we're going.
Right.
Let them know.
We have a meeting coming up with First Tennessee Development District in the next couple of weeks, so that's a good place to even say, hopefully, I think it's right after our next meeting, so it may be real timely. So that would be all the mayors.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great report.
Our next item is your discussion on the economic consulting, I believe.
We, in this year's budget, we set aside roughly $50,000 for kind of strategic planning, economic development planning. And we don't have anything in front of us to vote on tonight, except giving our city manager direction to move forward. The state budget will be rapidly moving down the road here. And I think one of the things that we talked about was to try to look at unique ways of funding, particularly on the West Walnut Street project. Whatever we can do to help expedite with the infrastructure that we know is going to be quite expensive, and that we also find out there possibly will be state money, and we need some representation to try to find those resources and to see if we can move this thing ahead. So I wanted to bring it up tonight, even though Mr. Peterson's not here, but perhaps we could weigh in on it and decide if this is the direction we want to go. We have a company that has made us a proposal that we don't have in front of us tonight, but it well falls within the money that we set aside for this kind of project. So let me just kind of throw that out and get y'all to weigh in on it and see where we want to go.
I guess you mentioned the representation, but it's a little bit more based on the presentation that we saw, in that it's specific representation with, guided experience in what we're looking at. And I would be more than happy to see us, at least like we did with retail strategies, do some sort of short-term initiative. And like you mentioned, the state's going to be in session very soon, and we need to get in front of them.
I agree. I think we should push ahead, and I think Bridge is a good company to use to do it.
Want to weigh in on anything?
Well, I'm certainly supportive of this approach to economic development and our economic future, and we just can't sit on the sidelines.
Right, we've, sometimes we haven't looked outside of ourselves to look for where money may be coming from for particularly big infrastructure projects, and I think that's what we want to take a look at. West Walnut Street is just a game changer for Johnson City. And we've seen from some of these big infrastructure projects, the return on that investment has been huge. Founders Park, King Commons, look what's happening to downtown. And those all started from these infrastructure projects. So I guess, Mr. Stahl, if, what we're hearing is that at our next meeting for Mr. Peterson to bring back the proposal from Bridge Public Affairs that we can vote on to start the process. And we don't want to be behind the 8 ball when everybody's going to Nashville to look for projects.
I was not part of that discussion, but is there, you actually have a formal proposal?
We do.
Okay,
Mhm.
so
We
he'll
do.
know it.
Yes, and he has that. He does. Okay,
Glad to.
all right. So that's just guidance at this point in time. We don't have anything to vote on, so,
Okay.
all right. Okay, what's next?
The next item is the city manager's report. I could easily say, since he's not here, there is no report, but
Well, I will tell you, he just texted me, there will be no vote in Jonesboro tonight.
I'll try to finish his report before he arrives, so it's that case. But actually, there are a few items, and they're pretty much under my purview in various departments. But the first item is, you all are aware, and the city commission has authorized the conversion process for the Kefauver property, which, as you know, it's property that is protected and reserved for outdoor development, and the commission authorized us to see if we could transfer that protection for outdoor development to newly acquired property adjacent to Wing Deer Park, which is 37.37 acres, which is envisioned to be a ball field development project. But part of the conversion process requires that we have an opportunity for public input and comment, and we have scheduled that in conjunction with our next Parks and Recreation Board meeting, which is Thursday, October 24th at 4 p.m. at Wing Deer Park in the administrative boardroom. We have issued the public notice, and there's opportunity to comment either at that meeting or through email. And these comments are submitted to the state of Tennessee, which in turn sends it to the National Park Service. So just want to make everybody aware we have officially advertised for that as part of the requirements for the conversion process. It's our hope and expectation that this will be probably the final stages of our application, which will be going to the state in entirety at the end of this month. So then they can decide how they want to proceed. So that's this Thursday. And also, just to give you an update, the commission also authorized, in conjunction with the purchase of the 37.37 acres, that we study and retain design and consulting services to perform schematic design and concept plans for field development, not just at the new 37 acres we acquired last year adjacent to Wingdere Park, but also on the lakefront to basically have diamond field and rectangle field development. And that's been a steady process, but it's proceeded methodically. Part of it has been some we've hired and had to retain some environmental consulting to perform some soil testing in certain areas, and we have those reports back. We have submitted that to the design firm, and also we have had CHA Design and Construction Solutions retained, and they have provided some preliminary estimates for both a 5-field complex at the newly acquired property and a 4-field complex, and also at the lakefront for rectangle fields, 4-field estimates and 3-field estimates. And I think James has some information he can share with you just to kind of give you an idea of what those estimates are at this point in time in terms of cost. And obviously that's nothing's been finalized, but the architect's now at the stage of saying, hey, these are the cost estimates, and he'd like to move forward and present a final schematic design and concept plan on both those sites. So,
and the numbers that they provided was for a 5-field, and this is, of course, the diamond fields, and a 4-field rectangular complex to accommodate sports such as football, lacrosse, soccer on the lakefront, was $26,150,000.
That was for all of them?
That's for all of them.
Okay.
That would be 9 fields. Keep in mind, the rectangular fields on the lakefront are 100% synthetic. The diamond fields, we chose to go with infield only, because anytime, well, not any time, but the majority of the times that you're going to suffer rainouts, it's your infill that causes that. Now, at their discretion, they also offered an option if we were to choose to go with 4 diamond fields and 3 rectangular fields. That cost would reduce from $26,150 or $26,150,000 to $21,700,000. So there's a difference of about $4.5 million.
When we first
Sticker
started,
shock.
when we first started talking about this, it was like 10 million, and the longer we wait, the more it goes up. Mr. Ellis, are we seeing the numbers in our leagues like we were 3 or 4 years ago?
What we have seen historically, Mayor, for the last 3-4 years is a consistent leveling off of our numbers. But what we're really not taking into consideration is the amount of work going into the fields to keep those playing 7 days a week, basically. We don't have the luxury of closing down more than 1 field at a time to do maintenance, and that's really not recommended. The national standard for the size of our programs and the number of fields, we should be shutting down a minimum of 3 fields at a time to do proper maintenance.
So the reason I asked that question, we were going to sign my little grandson up for not T-ball, the next one up, Little League, I guess. And they were talking about how the 2 different Little League organizations were probably going to combine because they're just not getting the players like they used to. And the competition is travel leagues.
It is, and what you're seeing there, while you're seeing the leveling off in your weekday league play, your weekend tournament participation because of travel ball is skyrocketing. And now with softball back in the Olympics, we're seeing an uptick in the girls' fast pitch. The boys' travel baseball is phenomenal. Right now, we're booked, I think Amanda told me, about 38 weekends a summer, including 2
But
week-long
we actually
national.
generate some revenue from the travel leagues.
Oh,
that come in.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. This coming weekend, I know in fast pitch softball.
Do we
in-
generate 26 million?
I can't promise that one. But this coming
Raise the-
weekend, our Halloween tournament, where the players and coaches all get to dress up for Halloween, decorate their dugouts, we have 98 teams participating in the Tri-City area.
98?
98 teams.
Wow.
Girls fast pitch softball
But
this
they're
weekend.
having to go all over.
Yeah, is it
They
3
are.
days? 3-day tournament?
One-day tournament.
One day.
Every
And that
team's
many
playing a
people for one
minimum
day.
of 3 games, and it's a challenge for these tournament organizations to be able to offer that activity. The number of games played in one day is phenomenal. Now, what happens there is the business is going to White Top in Bristol, they're going to Ridgeview and Grandview in the county, they're going to Domtar in Kingsport. They had one tournament earlier this summer where they actually branched out all the way to Morristown. So could you imagine playing a 9 o'clock game
Yeah.
at Wingdeer Park and a 1 o'clock game in Morristown? But that level of ball has really taken off to the point that if we're going to continue to drive the economic aspect in our sports marketing, we really need additional fields.
So-
And just during the week, as I said, the maintenance on what we're trying to accomplish.
So the 5 softball and 4 rectangular fields, how does, for 26 million, how does that divide up? How much would the 5 fields cost? And which, in your opinion, if you could only do one set of fields first, what would it be?
It was determined by the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. Their first choice was to do the diamond fields. And to answer your question, before I go any further, the 5-field option was $14,700,000. The 4-field for the rectangular is $11,450,000.
And that takes into consideration the property, the excavation?
Absolutely, yes.
everything.
They've done extensive work and surveying and so forth.
We can show you at a agenda review meeting, some of the detailed costs, if you want to see the line items of what he's identified that makes up those totals.
Absolutely.
Do you not think that if we built 4 rectangular fields down at the lake, that you would not see a huge uptick in the amount of people playing
I
soccer
think if
in
you
Johnson
were
City?
to put those down there, Commissioner, with synthetic turf, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing I think's been missing from the rectangular sports is the soccer tournaments primarily, and the weekend lacrosse tournaments, football tournaments. I think you'll bring that component, which will also help drive economics as well.
We are getting a lot of softball and baseball tournaments because of Wingdeer's fields. We are not getting as many soccer tournaments because we don't have it. They are getting them, but they aren't coming here.
Right, and the majority of the travel teams, you have to understand the travel ball. You have an A level, which is your elite teams. Your B is sort of the 500, and then your C is true recreational. Even though it's travel ball, it's recreational level teams. The majority of your A and B teams look for cities with synthetic turf. They know if they're going to travel that distance, spend the monies for hotel, et cetera, they want to be able to play the games when they get here.
Right down.
Unfortunately, I have vast experience in
Yeah,
traveling
I
with
do
them,
too.
so yeah.
I've sat in
going
a
to those
hotel for
places
3 days waiting to play a ball game.
Where we've
That's
gone to
very
South
frustrating.
Carolina and Chattanooga and those places and spent a lot of money at those
Absolutely, sir.
places.
Absolutely. And just as an FYI, I'm not sure if the commission knows, but the CVB will be placing a bid for the 14 and under girls Class A Fast Pitch National Tournament next month with USA Softball.
We did the video.
For 2021,
We
that's
did?
exactly right, you
Yeah.
did. And that tournament could draw as many as 100 teams for 7 days from all across the country, so.
So would that would require fields throughout the region?
Your basic formula is 10 teams per field.
Okay.
So if you have 10 fields, you can accommodate 100 teams. And it's easier for tournament hosts to be able naturally, and Commissioner Fowler, you can relate to this with the sports, to be able to accommodate a 10-field location at one park versus having to pick up and travel to Bristol for the next segment of games and so forth.
Mr. Ellis, the fields over at Civitan have really vastly improved.
Thank you very much,
we've-
and thank you for the support, giving us the additional dollars to be able to make the improvements.
It's helped a lot.
And as I told you, we're not letting up. Right now, they look as good probably this time of the year as they have in the past 10 years.
So you didn't hear the rest of my question here, though. Are we doing some of the similar work out at the fields at Wingdare?
Yes, we are.
On the
Yes, we are.
rectangles? Okay,
Yes.
that's good.
Not to the same level or magnitude just because of what we had to start with. For an example, when we're top dressing, we're generally putting out 100 tons of sand to top dress at Civitan because we have 5 fields there. We will put out 50 tons at Wingdare. You have 3 fields, lesser fields, and the conditions were much different when we began.
Are we making any progress with any of the elementary schools?
We have 4 sites up and running. I think, and I'm gonna try to remember correctly, North Side, South Side, Fairmont, and Topper Academy. We have safe practice areas there. There are some concerns because we did purchase soccer goals and put on those fields. And our neighbors who operate football have concerns for that. And we don't want the players running through the goals, not that goalpost. So some of them, we've given the school the opportunity to remove the goals during football practice. But from what I understand, our athletic staff to tell me that's really taken a lot of pressure off of our game fields.
Sorry, any of our Parks and Rec leagues practicing over at the schools?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the other 4 locations we will be working on this year. There's one in particular that's going to be a huge challenge for us just because of the topo and so forth, but we're committed. That's Lake Ridge. Yes, sir. It sort of sits in a bowl and there's bolters there, but, they're practicing there every evening.
And Commissioner Hunter, I hate to tell you, but my granddaughter's team beat your daughter's team
Again?
Tuesday night, yeah.
We may have a protest on that game,
Commissioners.
Commissioners.
They won 2-0.
I think someone brought in a ringer. I heard one player scored 4 goals.
We're gonna have to check some IDs for 8.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
So when will the final, these are preliminary, when will the design team?
Well, that's where we're at. Where we're at, we want to bring you this information because, as you pointed out, Mayor, the original cost estimates, which were very preliminary, were not, like you said, around $9 million, $10 million. And obviously, in lieu of this additional information, I think we're at a crossroads where the architect's looking for a direction. Does he provide a schematic design and concept plan for 5 fields, 5 diamonds, and 4 on the lakefront, or 4 and 3, or some combination, some lesser amount, and he's looking for direction of what he should send you, and whether that means you would like to hear from him and hear greater detail of what he's been studying before that decision is made. I think and the park board obviously has recommended 5 fields and 4 rectangles at the lakefront, but in lieu of the financial information, we recognize you have so much debt capacity, and we recognize that you have a capital improvement plan that with certain priorities beyond Parks and Recreation. So I think that's where he's at, some direction of how to proceed and what to bring back to you. That's where we're at.
The 4 fields versus the 5 on the diamonds, so you just have one, what do you call them, wagon wheels? The 5th field was kind of.
The way it was designed, yes, because of cost. If we were to put the 5 fields in a circular layout, very similar to the Starplex in Murfreesboro, the cost, believe it or not, would be, I think, $1.5 million in addition to be able to do that. Quite honestly, staff does not recommend that layout, though. We would be much more pleased to have only a 4 field versus 1 field out by itself. That poses issues with restrooms, with parents supervising, children there who aren't playing at the time. Other children are. So yes, and we would definitely not recommend anything less than 4 diamond and 3 rectangular. If we're going to look to the future and really be a driver on weekend events and long-term events, It really would be in our best interest to look at a minimum of 4 and 3.
So if we went 3 rectangulars, plus we have 3 out there, that would be 6 at Wayne Deer versus
Yes,
7.
and most of our play, recreation-wise, and a lot of the travel soccer, from what I understand, they do play the small-sided games, short fields. So for every rectangular field, you could have 2 small-sided games going on
The new ones would be turf, the old ones would still remain
Yes.
grass, natural grass.
currently.
So are 3 turf fields enough for,
That would give you 675 by 50 fields, which to my understanding with USFF, it's, that should accommodate play up through at least U12 now.
all right, commissioners, what's the guidance?
Do you have any really rich people that want to give us a lot of money? Because
think
that's
we-
sort of where we are right now.
We increased the cost of renting them, yeah.
Lottery tickets, what do you want to do?
Yeah. So tell us this time schedule, so where we are with the designer right now is they've gotten to this point, they've come up with this estimate, and so the next phase of their work.
Next phase would be a more in-depth schematic and a true conceptual
Have we funded that?
with true numbers. We have funded,
We have funded that, yeah. We have signed a contract to provide schematic design and concept plan, and he could have that complete within 7 to 8 weeks from final direction.
If they designed it for the 5 and 4, yeah, I think we're gonna have to, whatever we do, we're gonna have to do in phases anyway.
Well, 4 and 4, I mean, I kind of agree with Jim,
Oh,
that fifth
you don't
one
want the
is-
5th.
Yeah.
that, yes, we do want it. It's just, it's
But
more
not
of a
that way.
challenge because you have to have a separate restroom facility. And it is a challenge for weekend tournaments where you're charging gate admissions and so forth. And then it's a burden on a lot of parents and grandparents to have to pull their tents and, all the amenities they bring with them to weekend tournaments and go like from field 1 at Wing Deer Park all the way to the back at field 5, 3 and 4 times a day, depending on whether your team's winning or losing.
If we were doing 4 and 4, we'd still probably be somewhere around 23, 22, 23.
4 field, now this is diamond, is 12.2. The cost would be 12,200,000. And the 4 on the lakefront would be 11.4. So you're about 20.
Almost 24.
24.
Did you consider making the one extra softball field like the championship game with extra stands for the finals of a tournament?
We
kind of
could,
thing?
we did not ask for cost estimates.
Yeah, 30.
Yeah, I'm just.
I know.
We
We
bought the
could.
land
Yeah.
to do this.
And a lot
at
of
Wing
cities
Deer.
do that. Chattanooga has done that.
Yeah,
I
we
think
saw-
you were
we-
on the trip at
we saw the-
Tiger River
With the
Park.
covers
With the
over
nice
that one,
stands.
and, yeah, with the nice stands, which, getting to play in that at the end, I'm
Absolutely.
sure that would be a draw for some other teams to come also.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we funded the schematic designs, of what you're saying, Mr.
Yeah,
Paul?
we have
Okay.
contracts to do 2 schematic designs and concept plans for both fields, both sites.
2 proposals, or 2 drawings for each, is that what you're saying?
Right, you're going to do a schematic design and concept plan for the 37 acres and a schematic design and concept plan for lakefront.
Okay.
That includes the amenities and all of them,
Yes.
that designs the whole
Restrooms.
park.
That's
Concession
restroom,
stands.
an additional maintenance
Maintenance
building, concessions, a walking trail, and playground.
Just to lay it out to you, well, example, he'll provide a layout plan, grading plan, utility plan, sewer, water, electrical data, drainage plan, lighting plan, and floor plan, restroom, concession buildings. That's what his scope is.
Well, the place we have to go hunt for money.
Yep. Do you know when some of our bond money's coming off? I know that may be.
Say Ms. Jennings and Mr. Wilson have a better concept than I do on that.
22. 22 is what I remember too, is when the bigger amounts were coming off.
I think they may be obligated already.
again, any other priority projects beyond Parks and Recreation, we respect the fact that you have a lot more projects beyond this department, but
Got some good news? Well, whether, it's the 5-4 if you did a,
Champion.
championship
Championship
field
field.
versus 4-3. I mean, you're talking $3 million difference, and we're wondering how we would get even the 21 million.
I understand,
at that
but you
point.
also are gonna maybe attract a whole lot more
Oh,
people
yeah,
over
I agree.
years of that
I wouldn't
field
wanna
to
see
pay
this
for it,
soccer
kind of
field
thing,
go.
so.
One option would be, if I may, I think Ed O'Hara informed us, Charlie, last week that for $700,000, we could grade out the fifth diamond field. And it be, we could seed that in-house,
Yeah.
and it just be for now. And that way you could phase it in as a championship location
And do the schematics now.
later down the road.
Let's practice here. What you got?
If you do nothing else.
Never
You
been on the
have,
CIP
you
yet.
have some good roll-off in FY 2021.
Oh.
But I don't know what other plans there are for that money.
We don't have anything else really.
What's the capacity there, Janet?
Probably, and Bob may have other ideas, but you have about 1.4 million in actual debt
Debt
service
service.
that's rolling off. That would, depends on interest rates, would probably buy you $17-18 million in borrowing, maybe, depending on the
I
interest
could
rates.
get half of
You-
those done if we just
Yeah.
used all of that for that.
Then
we're
you're
not
gonna
asking
have.
you, oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Then you have to wait till about 2023 for some additional roll-off.
Yeah.
So,
It's phased. I mean,
if you do nothing
But there's
else,
other
so.
stuff, yeah.
We're not asking you tonight to give us a direction. We wanted, I mean, whether you want to defer that to a couple of weeks from now, but I think he is looking for some direction, and if you need more information, we can give you the details of his estimates and to help you think through that along with any other
I
information
think
Janet
we
may has.
need to go ahead with the schematic, finish the
I do too.
drawing things and bring that to us, so.
That was the intent this evening, was to bring you up to date on where we are as we will advise our park, or present it to our park board next Thursday evening at their monthly meeting.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, James may want to mention real quick on Buffalo Mountain, you had a study going on there too.
Yes.
Oh.
We have contracted with Trail Solutions, and their representatives will be in town either the last weekend of this month or first weekend of November. They're working out travel arrangements, at which time they will begin a feasibility study to look at potential for bike trails, additional hiking trails, and so forth. They'll be meeting with members of our Parks Advisory Board, our naturalists, and with the Sorba Bike organization. And we're hoping to bring back some good information there. But the numbers have really been increasing quite a bit on activity at Buffalo Mountain Park, as well as Tannery Knobs. Every evening after 3 p.m. in particular, we're busy.
I couldn't, we were up there Saturday, I had my hike with the mayor and had 21 people show up. We had a great hike, and Connie Deegan is just a gift
does a
that we
phenomenal
have.
job.
She just had people just mesmerized, But I couldn't believe all the activity up there with people hiking. It was really good. There's just no parking. That's another
That's a
big one.
challenge right now.
Yeah,
there, and,
yeah, so if we're gonna open up the trails and publicize it more and all that kind of stuff, we need to figure out something. And there are, I noticed too, the picnic areas, the picnic tables are pretty worn, and we probably need to have a work detail up there one day, just kind of clean up that area a
Should
little
be
bit.
replacing those
Okay.
in the next couple of months,
Oh,
I
good.
suspect. Yes.
Okay, all right.
We're looking
Good,
at
good.
all of our picnic pavilions and tables and so forth right now. So,
Thanks, James.
all right, thank you.
Very quickly, just by October 30th, Wednesday, October 30th, the Knoxville Transportation Planning Organization is interested in coming to Johnson City to ride and learn about the Tweetsie Trail. They apparently heard about it and wanted to know evolved, and apparently they're in the process of renting bikes, working with our Park and Recreation Department, with a vendor here in town. They're gonna ride to Elizabethton and have lunch down there, and I think they've asked whether staff members, the city commissioners, the mayor, anybody willing to ride with them. I'm not sure who's all coming up. I know there were some elected officials as well as the appointed officials. I think I understand this phase may be the appointed folks this time, but nevertheless, they're coming, and we're looking forward to hosting them. And
I'm gonna ride with them.
that'll be
I'll be there.
good trip. And the only final item I have is you asked for us to look at the board and commission realignment. I'm working with the legal department, so there's a lot of work been accomplished. We will share with you some information and some documentation at least your next agenda review, and that way you can kind of look at what you see there and give us some guidance on how you want it finalized. And I think legal's done a good job in helping with that project, so that's it.
I think our next item is the public input.
Public input.
Okay, I will open public input. If anybody would like to speak to the commission, you're welcome to come up. Chief. Okay, seeing no one, I'll close public input. You want to come up? Sure, come on up.
Sure, so this is a time just to say whatever?
Sure, you get 3 minutes.
Oh, okay, all right.
State your name and address.
My name is Tyler Crosby. I live at 200 South Boone Street, right downtown. I'd like to thank you all for everything you've done for this city, and I truly enjoyed coming tonight to hear how this process actually works. I've been very intrigued by how it seemed to move tonight, hearing about all the ordinances and from the Humane Society, the animal shelter. I truly enjoyed it, and actually, I think I'll probably be coming next week, or at the next meeting, November the 7th. Yeah, just to learn a little bit more about the whole process, and maybe some of you heard earlier. What I'm most intrigued about is the West Walnut Corridor project. I really want to come and hear the next time that's on the agenda.
And I think if you go to the website, Preston's probably not here now, but I think the whole concept plan for West Walnut Street is on the website.
Yes.
If you haven't seen it.
Development Services, you should look under there.
Yeah, I think it was like a 45-page PDF.
Right.
Yeah, I downloaded that a couple weeks ago,
Good.
and I wrote a paper about it.
Oh, good.
Good. Can we see the paper?
I don't think it's been graded by my professor yet, but
If you do well, bring it back now, just.
but yeah, I truly enjoy the process, and I look forward to seeing you guys again.
Well, thank you for coming and being patient, sitting back in these hard seats back here. They're getting worn out, I think. But thanks for coming. Anything we can do, please let us know. We'll
Thank you.
get you with, I know you've talked with Chief Staples over here in the fire department, so again, I really want to recommend you taking Johnson City JC 101, which is phenomenal.
Do you know when?
Probably in the spring.
In the spring,
Yeah,
okay.
I would
Yeah.
think so. And it's posted on the website. We advertise it and everything too.
Just one question. After the meeting is over, can I speak with the recorder about just getting the names of some of the people who spoke, just for my notes?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Is that okay?
That'd be good. Yep. Good with us. It was a public meeting, so their names were all stated when they come up.
Yeah, I got most of them, but there
Okay.
were some things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we'll close the public input. Anything else? Commissioners, anything going on in your worlds this week?
Well, not this week, but we got a couple big parties coming up.
We do.
For the city, November
Tell us about
30th. There's the gala, November 30th. Tickets went on sale, and I think a third of the tickets are gone already, and it's
I
been
bought
open
mine.
one day, so hurry up and buy your tickets. And then that's for the 30th, and then on December the 1st, there's a community party that's gonna occur downtown. I think it's King Commons, I'm not sure about that. On a Sunday afternoon, I think that's where we're gonna close the time capsule and do a number of other things. So we are less than 50 days away from our birthday and the sesquicentennial celebrations finishing up.
So we'll finally light the birthday candles.
Candles, and there's gotta be a T-shirt somewhere. I mean, there just has to be, yeah, I think that's good. And from Planning Commission, we had an interesting and long meeting last Planning Commission, and I think we're gonna see a lot of community energy at our next meeting relative to a couple of issues that came up there, and that's
Community energy.
I
I
like
like the
that.
way
You like that?
you said that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there'll be more seats filled than
I
tonight.
will
so.
open the community energy portion of our meeting. Very nice. Commissioner Hunter?
TIF advisory had no meeting, and now we have a designated to take my spot on the public library, but I would just say, the following week, I believe, December 6th and 7th, to mark our calendars for the Christmas tree lighting and the Christmas parade with Clydesdales.
With the Clydesdale horses, yes, yeah. I think Chief over there told me he's from close to Busch Gardens, so he's real familiar with them. You won't get up and ride them, will you?
Knows them
No.
by name.
No.
No,
Mr.
I
Powell?
was at the CVB meeting, and it was gonna be a surprise that the Clydesdales were coming, and the next morning, I saw it in the paper. It surprised everybody, so, they've been trying to get them to come for a long time, so. Sounded like we announced too that we were gonna have an old restored fire truck in the parade, and our chief is gonna be riding on that. And so we've got the Clydesdales and that both in this year's parade, which would be great.
Yeah, it's my understanding, one of the Clydesdales will be at our Christmas tree lighting on Friday night, along with the Dalmatian. And it's strategically positioned for great pictures. You'll see the Clydesdale, the Christmas tree, and our landmark sign, which should be a really good photo op.
The other thing was Bands of America was here last weekend.
They were.
And talked about 31 bands. They estimated, this is a rough estimate, of about $3.5 million that was spent in the city of Johnson City by the bands last weekend. So, and they want to come back. It was a great deal. We need to work out something with the fire inspector or figure out ways of getting people in and out easier to get more people, because they had some problems with, wanted to expand to see better, and they couldn't because of the amount of people that were there to watch. They were limited, so there were 3,000 people there in the dome. So they're working on ways of getting people in and out of there besides what they have right now, so they can expand the amount of people that can be in the dome, which will help ETSU and help us have more things like Bands of America coming, so.
It was a great event. I went on a couple of different occasions, both on Saturday morning and then for the finale that didn't finish till 10:30 on Saturday night. But these were amazing groups of talented musicians, and boy, did they bring their families and their support staff with them. So they were in and out of the dome with props like you wouldn't believe. So, I think when I was in high school, people had an instrument, a hand-me-down uniform, and a football field. That was about it. And boy, it's quite a production, but we had a lot of people in
The bands
town.
were warming up on Saturday, somewhere around 5 a.m.
Yeah,
First performances were 6.
yeah.
Were they
That's
over at,
dedication.
were they over at Science Hill Stadium doing that, where you could hear them from your house? Because they were,
Yes, sir.
they were taking some bands different places to warm up before the dome, so.
Our visitors saw Johnson City at its best, and they loved it. I've talked to a lot of different people who came in, and they thought that it was a great venue with probably a little bit of exception of how the crowd was managed, but it was all good. And we are, just to reiterate too, I did see the Seagrave last week. They're putting it back together now with the beautiful paint job on it. It is fire engine red. So I think it's just so appropriate that it's going to be ready for our real birthday celebration. I think it will be downtown for the gala. It may even be parked somewhere on the course for the turkey trot, if it's ready, so people can see it. That's about 5,000 people will be going by it to see that. So we're really excited, and Chief, until we can thank them more formally, all the firemen who have worked on the restoration of this has just been amazing. And I think they have a lot of ownership in it, so we want to make sure we recognize them well. Anything else? Mr. Stahl?
Not from my end, thank you.
All right. Ms. Jennings, anything you got? Did you find some money someplace? We need
the
about
money tree
26
has
million. Okay. All right, nothing further, meeting adjourned.